He always knew something was off that day, watching from the sidelines as his daughter Meghan glided down the aisle of St. George's Chapel. Thomas Markle could feel it in his bones. The way she moved, the flicker in her eyes, the way her smile seemed almost rehearsed. It wasn't the joy of a bride stepping into a fairy tale. It was the quiet, precise calm of someone who already had a plan, a route mapped out, an exit strategy no one else could see. And that's when the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. She never intended to stay. From the very beginning, it was all part of a plan, meticulously crafted, hidden behind a polished public facade, and known only to her closest allies. Thomas, in that moment, realized that the wedding, the pomp, the cameras, the public applause, it was all theater, and he was watching the rehearsal for a story the world would never suspect. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be asking yourself, how could a father witness something so monumental and yet feel powerless to intervene? How could someone prepare to walk down that aisle, step into history, and yet be planning a private exit from it all? And more importantly, how did Thomas Markle come to know the secret that would shock not just the family, but the entire globe? Today, we're diving into the story no one expected him to tell and the revelations he's finally willing to share. The tale begins not with Meghan's first public appearance or Harry's charming proposal. It begins in the quiet, unseen moments of family life, the conversations behind closed doors, the texts that vanished before anyone else could read them, the cryptic hints that only a father might notice. Thomas has spent years holding these secrets, watching the headlines, listening to interviews, and piecing together the puzzle that was unfolding before his eyes. And now, decades later, he's breaking his silence. He's speaking not to absolve or condemn, but to reveal what he has known all along. Meghan Markle's exit plan from the royal family wasn't a spontaneous decision made under the glare of media scrutiny. It was a calculated journey, orchestrated with precision, patience, and an understanding of both public perception and private advantage. The shock of realizing your daughter, whom you've loved and protected, has harbored such a plan is something Thomas describes as surreal. It was not anger he felt in those first moments. It was disbelief, confusion, and an almost cinematic sense of inevitability. You see, as a father, he had watched Meghan grow, supporting her through auditions, acting roles, and the transition into public life. He had seen her ambition, her intelligence, and her relentless drive. But ambition is one thing. Devising a plan to step into the monarchy and then step away from it, all while managing the optics, is something else entirely. It's something few people, even those closest, could imagine. And yet, Thomas saw the signs, the subtle signals, the little breadcrumbs that hinted at a deeper strategy. Now, consider the stakes. The royal family is not just a family, it's an institution. Every move, every word, every appearance is scrutinized. And yet, despite this relentless public eye, Meghan, according to Thomas, had calculated her path with surgical precision. She understood not just how to navigate the monarchy's rigid structures, but how to manipulate perception outside them, how to secure leverage, attention, and control. She knew that stepping away wouldn't be a moment of weakness or defeat. It would be a moment of power, meticulously framed to appear as liberation, necessity, or self-preservation. And she had prepared for it years in advance. Thomas recalls moments from their private interactions that now take on chilling clarity. Conversations that seemed ordinary at the time, laughter over trivial family matters, or discussions about career opportunities. These were all, in hindsight, parts of a larger script. He remembers a particular evening, sitting in his modest living room, sipping tea with Meghan across from him. She was discussing future ambitions, talking about challenges, expressing opinions about media, family, and public life. At the time, Thomas thought these were the musings of a young woman navigating new territory. But looking back, he recognizes the strategic undertones. There was intent, precision, and a quiet determination that went unnoticed, even by him. And in that recognition lies the horror, or perhaps the revelation that this path was chosen deliberately. You might wonder, why would someone plan such an exit? Why not embrace the position, the platform, the historic opportunity of joining one of the world's most famous royal families? Thomas suggests it's a combination of freedom, control, and a nuanced understanding of the media. Meghan, according to him, recognized early on that staying within the royal structure meant compromise, restriction, and a life dictated by centuries-old protocols. Planning her exit allowed her to claim autonomy, reframe the narrative, and secure influence on her own terms. And perhaps most importantly, it allowed her to define her public persona on her own terms, untethered from palace constraints. Even the smallest details now appear significant. Thomas recounts instances that might seem mundane to an outsider: a phone call ignored, a subtle deflection in conversation, a private meeting that was just for work. Yet, these moments all fit a pattern. In the quiet observation of a father, a picture emerged. Meghan was not merely a participant in her life story. She was the author, editing each chapter, planning each exit, calculating the reactions of every player, from Harry to the press to her own family. And while the media has long painted a picture of sudden drama, abrupt decisions, and reactive choices, Thomas's account challenges this narrative. He portrays a deliberate, almost methodical approach. He hints at early planning stages, clandestine discussions, and even a possible playbook designed to execute the perfect exit. These are not casual remarks. They are strategic movements carefully designed and executed under the radar years before the public was aware. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect for Thomas, and what makes his revelation so compelling, is the emotional complexity of it all. As a father, witnessing a child's ambitious maneuvers can be a source of pride, but when those maneuvers involve secrecy, manipulation, and an eventual estrangement, the pride is complicated by grief, confusion, and a profound sense of betrayal. He had tried in small ways to offer guidance, to counsel caution, but the plan, he realized, was too firmly in place. The wedding day, the public smiles, the media coverage, all were stepping stones toward a goal that only she fully understood. Now, as he steps forward to speak, Thomas is not merely recounting events. He is sharing a perspective few have considered, and one that reframes much of what we thought we knew about the royal family, the marriage, and the narrative constructed for the world. He offers insights into not just Meghan's motivations, but the ripple effects of strategic decisions on relationships, reputations, and royal protocols. And with each revelation, a question lingers in the mind of the audience. What else was carefully orchestrated behind the cameras, and how much of the story we have been told is merely a reflection of the plan she had mapped out years before? But here's the twist. Thomas is not only reflecting on past actions, he also teases secrets that remain hidden: messages, documents, and confessions that could dramatically alter public understanding. He hints at proofs, evidence that the world has never seen, that support the notion that Meghan's exit was calculated long before any public announcement. And in doing so, he leaves the audience with a chilling anticipation. If what he knows is true, then much of the carefully constructed narrative surrounding the royal family, Meghan and Harry, is far from complete. By the end of this introduction, viewers are left with several unanswered questions. How early did Meghan plan her exit? Who knew? How did Harry remain unaware? And most importantly, what does Thomas know that he is only now revealing? These questions set the stage for the chapters to come, each promising a deep dive into private conversations, hidden communications, strategic moves, and emotional reckonings that Thomas Markle has finally decided to share. The story is personal, dramatic, and shocking. It challenges public perceptions, reshapes familiar narratives, and introduces revelations that will reverberate across media and family dynamics alike. And yet, Thomas's account also offers subtle human insights: the conflict between parental love and paternal shock, the quiet despair of realizing a child has taken steps far beyond what anyone imagined, and the complex interplay between family loyalty and the harsh glare of public scrutiny. But what Thomas reveals is only the beginning: the layers of planning, the hidden communications, the strategic manipulations, and the fallout that followed. These are the details that will truly shock, challenge assumptions, and keep viewers on the edge of their seats. And so, with the wedding as the opening act and Thomas's revelation as the lens, the story begins. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Could you really tell a wedding was a rehearsal for an exit? Thomas Markle knew the answer before anyone else could. The chapel was brimming with royalty, celebrities, dignitaries, and the endless hum of cameras. Flowers lined the aisle, glinting under the soft chapel light. Yet, even amidst the glitter, Thomas saw it: subtle pauses, fleeting glances, and movements that told a story the world wasn't seeing. Meghan's smile was perfect, but there was something almost clinical about it, a practiced grace that suggested a mind elsewhere, calculating, anticipating, planning. He wondered then, as he would recall for years afterward, how someone could project joy so convincingly while harboring intentions so private, so radical, that they would eventually reshape the monarchy itself. The first striking detail was not the gown, not the walk down the aisle, but the small, almost imperceptible gestures. The way Meghan adjusted her gloves, the way she subtly glanced toward the side of the chapel where cameras were positioned, the careful pauses between her words, all of it, Thomas realized, was deliberate. And he wondered, Was this the bride everyone was seeing, or a strategist orchestrating her first move? He recalls leaning in to catch snippets of conversation with the wedding planners, her stylists, and aides. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to anyone else. To him, though, it was all part of a larger picture, a careful choreography of appearances designed to mask intent. Think about that for a moment. You've prepared for one of the most publicized events in history. The world watches every move. Every detail is scrutinized. Yet you have a secret plan, one that could shock family, friends, and the globe. Could you maintain that composure? Could you smile genuinely while calculating your next steps behind the scenes? According to Thomas, Meghan did, and she did it flawlessly. Thomas remembers the precise moment he began to suspect that something wasn't as it seemed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no outbursts or confrontations. It was a fleeting moment, a tiny detail. Meghan's mother had been talking about family, traditions, and heritage, and Meghan had responded with warmth. But her words felt rehearsed. The cadence, the tone, even the timing was slightly off. Thomas describes it as an almost imperceptible discord, like hearing a familiar song played slightly out of key. It was then he realized that Meghan's focus was not entirely on the ceremony or the family legacy. Her mind was elsewhere, calculating the next act. And the irony was crushing. Here was a wedding billed as the union of two hearts, celebrated by millions, lauded across media outlets as the fairy tale of the decade. But in private, according to Thomas, it was more complex. It was a chessboard. Each smile, each handshake, each public display of affection was a move. Each photograph was a piece in a strategic puzzle. The ceremony itself, the media coverage, even the audience's applause, it was all data, all variables in a plan only Meghan fully understood. Thomas remembers watching the procession, seeing Harry's expression, and feeling a wave of empathy and sorrow. Harry looked elated, overwhelmed by love, caught in a whirlwind of ceremony and expectations. And yet Thomas saw the subtle contradictions. Harry's joy was genuine. Meghan's composure, though, carried the weight of a private agenda. There was anticipation in her eyes, a calculation, as if she were measuring not only the moment, but also its impact on the coming years. He wondered, silently, did Harry even know? Did anyone at that altar, anyone in the chapel, even sense the plan unfolding right in front of them? The floral arrangements, the music, the vows, they were all part of the performance. Thomas noticed small deviations from the script of a typical royal wedding. The timing between the bride's steps, the subtle nods exchanged with aides, the way she responded to photographers' cues. Everything was executed with a precision that suggested rehearsal beyond ordinary preparation. It was as if Meghan were testing not only the environment, but also the reactions of everyone around her. Every movement, no matter how subtle, seemed to reinforce the notion that she knew what she was going to do, long before the ceremony ended. Consider the public perception. The world saw a radiant bride, glowing with happiness, seemingly embracing tradition and the monarchy with open arms. But Thomas saw behind the curtain. The private tension, the hidden layers of intention, the undercurrent of strategy that most would miss. And that tension, he realized, was the seed of her eventual exit. He recalls an unsettling moment during the vows. Meghan's words were flawless, delivered with poise and grace. But her eyes, Thomas insists, were scanning, not the room, not the guests, but Harry himself, as if evaluating his reaction, weighing his trust, measuring how far her plan could go without disruption. Was this the moment he realized she might have had a secret exit strategy already? Perhaps. The thought struck him sharply. If this was part of a plan, how long had it been in motion? Days? Months? Years? The calculation sent a shiver down his spine. And then there were the photographs, the images captured for history. Every smile, every gesture, every embrace was framed, edited, and presented to the public as a seamless fairy tale. But Thomas knew better. Behind those perfectly poised images were subtle signals. A hand lingering too long, a glance too brief, a posture too rigid. To most, these were inconsequential. To Thomas, they were proof of an agenda, a roadmap of a plan that had been laid out long before the cameras rolled. But what makes this even more startling is how few people noticed these signs at the time. The royal staff, photographers, media, even Harry himself, all were caught up in the grandeur, the ceremony, the spectacle. Yet Thomas, a father who knew his daughter in a way few others did, could read between the lines. He could see the strategy woven into her expressions, the subtle manipulations hidden beneath smiles. And with each passing moment of that ceremony, the pattern became undeniable. Meghan had a plan, and it was already in motion. This chapter of the wedding also highlights contradictions. On the surface, the union was about love, family, and tradition. Behind the scenes, according to Thomas, it was about power, timing, and positioning. Emotional spikes punctuate his recollections. Pride in his daughter's poise, shock at the realization of her intent, sadness at Harry's unwitting role, and a lingering fear about what would unfold once the initial celebrations ended. These contradictions, between public joy and private strategy, form the backbone of the narrative he's about to reveal. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, there were human elements Thomas couldn't ignore. Harry's genuine excitement, the joy of the guests, and the historical significance of the ceremony created a tension that only heightened his awareness of the underlying agenda. The contrast between the magical story presented to the world and the private reality observed by Thomas was almost cinematic. It was as if two narratives existed simultaneously, one for the world, one for those who knew where to look. Even the smallest interactions now take on amplified significance. A whisper shared with an aide, a brief look exchanged with a family member, or a fleeting gesture captured by an unseen camera becomes a potential clue in the puzzle Thomas was piecing together. Each detail is a thread leading to the realization that the wedding, magnificent as it appeared, was only a prologue to a carefully executed exit strategy, one that no one could yet predict, but which Thomas knew was silently taking shape. He asks himself, and implicitly asks the audience, how could someone orchestrate such a complex plan and maintain composure under the most intense scrutiny in the world? How could the same person simultaneously play the role of a bride while plotting a departure that would reshape a royal family? And what does that say about the interplay between personal ambition and public perception? These questions set the stage for what Thomas will reveal in the chapters to come. By the end of the ceremony, as Meghan and Harry walked down the aisle waving to an adoring crowd, Thomas felt a complicated mix of emotions: admiration, confusion, and an uneasy dread. The public celebrated the fairy tale. He understood the strategy beneath it. The wedding, as beautiful and historic as it seemed, had quietly revealed the first moves of a larger game, and Thomas was one of the few who recognized it. And then there was the most disconcerting realization. The exit plan had likely been conceived well before the wedding. Thomas remembers thinking that night, sitting alone after the celebrations, that this was not a reactionary choice, but a long-considered strategy, executed with precision. And that knowledge left him with a chilling question. If the wedding was just the opening act, what was the full story, and how far ahead had Meghan already planned? But what came next would bring Thomas even closer to the truth. And it was a truth that would shock him, and eventually the entire world, more than any wedding day revelation ever could. Could a parent ever truly know their child? Thomas often asked himself this question in the quiet moments after realizing Meghan's secret plans. He had watched her grow from a curious, ambitious little girl into a woman capable of navigating global stages, cameras, and public scrutiny. Yet no amount of fatherly love, advice, or intervention seemed to give him insight into the private decisions she would make, decisions that would eventually leave him shocked, bewildered, and estranged. Thomas's relationship with Meghan had always been complicated. From her earliest years, he admired her intelligence and determination. She was sharp, ambitious, and endlessly inquisitive, a child who could charm strangers and outwit family members alike with equal ease. But there were moments that foreshadowed the complexities to come. Little things he would later interpret as subtle signs of independence and strategic thinking, how she negotiated privileges, subtly redirected conversations, or managed her peers. These had once seemed like the antics of a normal teenager. Looking back, Thomas now believes they were the earliest indicators of a mind capable of planning a royal exit. He remembers the teenage years vividly. Arguments over school, friendships, and choices in hobbies would often escalate, leaving both parties frustrated. But underneath these conflicts was a deeper truth. Meghan's drive to control her own narrative was already emerging. Thomas often tried to guide her, suggesting caution, highlighting consequences, and urging patience. Yet Meghan had a way of listening without absorbing, of appearing attentive while mentally formulating a counterpoint, a strategy, or an alternative route. As a father, Thomas found this both impressive and unsettling. Was this ambition natural, or was it the first hint of a meticulous ability to plan multiple steps ahead of everyone else? Even after Meghan became an adult and pursued her acting career, the patterns remained. Thomas recounts specific instances: her careful attention to contracts, her selective sharing of information, her keen awareness of media optics. To the casual observer, these were just professional decisions. To Thomas, they were hints of someone who could orchestrate outcomes on a scale most could never imagine. He recalls watching her read interviews, respond to questions, and maneuver around difficult conversations with a subtle precision that left him in awe, but also increasingly wary. The father-daughter bond, though, was complicated not only by ambition, but by distance, both physical and emotional. Meghan's life grew increasingly public, moving from Toronto to Los Angeles, then into Hollywood circles where every word, every action was scrutinized. Thomas, living a relatively private life, could only observe from afar, yet he remained deeply involved emotionally. He tried to maintain influence, to provide perspective, and occasionally to steer her toward what he considered prudent choices. But as Meghan's world expanded, so too did the gap between them. The distance wasn't just geographic. It was a gap in understanding, in priorities, in vision for the future. Thomas recalls phone calls that now feel prophetic. Conversations that seemed routine at the time now stand out in stark relief. He would ask her about her work, her aspirations, or her personal life, only to receive answers that were carefully measured, rehearsed even. She was polite, loving, and attentive on the surface, but underneath there was a sense of guardedness. Thomas describes the feeling as standing on the shore, watching someone sail a boat whose destination you cannot see, knowing the wind, currents, and tides might take them somewhere you cannot reach. The emotional tension between father and daughter intensified as Meghan's relationship with Harry developed. Thomas could see the excitement, the charm, the whirlwind nature of their romance, but he also sensed the strategic elements in Meghan's behavior, choices made with the awareness of audience, optics, and long-term goals. It was a contradiction he struggled to reconcile, the genuine affection that seemed to exist alongside a calculated understanding of the public stage. Could love and strategy coexist so seamlessly? Thomas often wondered if Harry, deeply invested in both emotion and tradition, could see the subtle layers beneath her poise. There were personal moments that remain etched in Thomas's memory, small gestures, private remarks, fleeting expressions that hinted at internal planning. A joke that seemed innocent but carried hidden meaning. A comment about life after marriage that now appears predictive. Each of these moments contributed to an emerging picture. Meghan was someone who could navigate affection and ambition simultaneously, who could blend emotional authenticity with strategic foresight. And this duality, while impressive, left Thomas with an uneasy awareness that her path might not align with his expectations, or even with the institution she was about to enter. The father-daughter bond is often rooted in trust and understanding, but Thomas found his trust tested. He wanted to believe in the love story, the fairy tale narrative, and the optimism surrounding Meghan's entry into the royal family. Yet, as the wedding approached, subtle clues accumulated, challenging that trust. He noticed her meticulous attention to details that went beyond ordinary wedding planning, how she communicated with aides, her insistence on controlling certain aspects of media access, the way she discussed future possibilities with a calm, almost detached tone. It was as though the wedding was a stage, and she was both performer and director. Thomas's concern grew as public scrutiny intensified. Every headline, every social media post, every paparazzi photograph was filtered through Meghan's awareness. She understood that perception was reality. She had learned how to navigate attention, criticism, and acclaim with a deft hand. But while the world applauded her grace and poise, Thomas saw the careful calculations behind it, and he feared that those calculations were part of a larger strategy, one that might lead to an eventual exit from the very institution she was marrying into. The emotional beats of this chapter are crucial. Thomas felt pride, astonishment, sadness, and fear all at once. Pride in the daughter who had grown into a confident, capable woman. Astonishment at the skill with which she maneuvered through complex social and public landscapes. Sadness at the realization that her path might diverge sharply from his hopes for family closeness. Fear at the possibility that the plan he was piecing together could profoundly disrupt relationships, reputations, and expectations. These conflicting emotions mirror the contradictions inherent in Meghan's journey, the interplay of ambition and affection, strategy and emotion, public perception and private intent. Thomas also reflects on moments of communication that, in hindsight, appear predictive of her exit. A casual remark about freedom, a question about public life, or a fleeting mention of independence now takes on heightened significance. He recalls being puzzled at the time, unable to fully grasp the long-term implications. Only later, when events unfolded, did he recognize the subtle blueprint hidden within her words. It is a revelation that underscores the complexity of understanding someone fully, even a child you've raised, when their ambitions extend into realms you cannot access. The fractures in the relationship were not abrupt, but evolved over time. They were marked by misalignments in understanding, differences in priorities, and the tension between parental guidance and adult autonomy. Thomas often struggled to reconcile his role as a father with the reality of Meghan's independence. Each decision she made, each step she took toward the public stage, created distance, even as it demonstrated her skill, determination, and foresight. The irony is palpable. Thomas loved Meghan fiercely, yet the very qualities that made him proud, her intelligence, charisma, and strategic mind, also created emotional distance. He grappled with this contradiction, trying to maintain connection while recognizing that he might not have insight into her deepest intentions. And it is this emotional complexity that forms the foundation for the revelations to come. For Thomas, understanding the plan was only part of the story. Processing the feelings it stirred was equally profound, painful, and ongoing. Thomas's reflections also highlight a critical element: foresight. He realized that Meghan's ability to anticipate reactions, manage perception, and plan strategically was not accidental. It was cultivated, intentional, and methodical. The father-daughter relationship, while marked by love, had always existed alongside a recognition of her capacity for careful calculation. And as events moved toward the wedding, he sensed that her plans were crystallizing, that the culmination of ambition, opportunity, and timing was approaching its first public act. But amidst all this observation and reflection, Thomas experienced moments of doubt. Was he overanalyzing? Was he projecting fears onto her actions? Could these interpretations be influenced by his own hopes, expectations, and past experiences? These questions haunted him, adding tension to his narrative. Yet, as the evidence accumulated, the subtle gestures, the remarks, the patterns, he became increasingly certain that something extraordinary, calculated, and unprecedented was underway. By the time the wedding arrived, the father-daughter relationship had reached a delicate, fragile state. The love remained, but so did the tension, the anticipation, and the realization that Meghan's journey might diverge sharply from familial expectations. Thomas knew that the coming days, weeks, and months would reveal whether the plan he suspected was real. And with each passing moment, he felt the weight of watching history unfold from a vantage point that offered both clarity and heartbreak. And then, just when he thought he had observed all there was to see, a private moment occurred that would cement his fears and confirm the existence of a carefully plotted strategy. A conversation, brief and seemingly innocuous, revealed intentions that went far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. It was in that instant that Thomas understood Meghan's exit plan was real, deliberate, and long in the making. The bond between father and daughter, already complex, had entered a new, precarious chapter. But what Thomas would uncover next, the hidden communications, the secret allies, and the strategic moves, would reveal even more shocking layers of planning that had been hidden in plain sight, leaving him to grapple with a truth that was as devastating as it was unbelievable. What if everything you thought? Perhaps the most striking element was Meghan's awareness of optics. Messages weren't just about content, they were about perception. She understood how words, even in private communication, could be discovered, leaked, or interpreted. The precision with which she managed this demonstrated foresight. She wasn't just communicating, she was controlling how her communications might ripple through the public and private spheres. It was a level of calculation that Thomas realized few could match. The emotional weight of recognizing these patterns was immense. For Thomas, understanding that his daughter had been planning a trajectory long before the world became aware was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. He admired her intelligence and skill, yet he also felt the sting of distance, the subtle alienation that came from realizing that some actions were not shared fully, not for secrecy's sake alone, but as part of a larger plan that would eventually separate them in profound ways. Even casual communications contained indicators of future strategy. A brief reference to a charity event could suggest public positioning. A question about media appearances could hint at timing for announcements. Each fragment, when viewed collectively, formed a roadmap, a hidden blueprint of intent. And for Thomas, piecing together that blueprint was both revelation and torment. He could see the trajectory, understand the intent, and yet remain powerless to influence it. By the end of this period of observation, Thomas had amassed an understanding of Meghan's strategic communications that was unprecedented in his life. He could trace patterns, anticipate actions, and identify the signs of planning and foresight that marked her every move. And this understanding set the stage for the revelations that would follow. Secret allies, media maneuvers, and financial strategies that converged to execute a meticulously planned exit from the royal family. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Hidden messages, conversations with confidants, and subtle signals in public interactions all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Meghan's exit was not spontaneous. It was deliberate, carefully timed, and guided by a comprehensive understanding of influence, perception, and opportunity. And Thomas, despite his closeness to her, was only beginning to uncover the depth of the plan. The question that lingered, the question that would drive the next phase of revelations, was this: if these secret communications revealed the blueprint, who else was aware? How many individuals had been enlisted, knowingly or unknowingly, to facilitate the strategy? And what would happen when the world finally saw the plan unfold? But what Thomas would uncover next, the hidden allies, the secret advisors, and the people working behind the scenes, would shock him even more than the messages themselves. And it would reveal the complexity of a plan that stretched far beyond anything he had imagined. Could someone be so close and yet so unaware? That's the question Thomas Markle wrestled with when he considered Prince Harry's role in Meghan's carefully plotted plan. Watching Harry during the wedding and in the months leading up to it, Thomas began to realize that Harry, charming, earnest, and deeply in love, might have been the last person to notice what was quietly unfolding before him. While the world saw a fairy tale romance, Thomas saw a subtle blind spot, one that Meghan had skillfully navigated, allowing her to advance her strategy without confrontation or suspicion. From Thomas's perspective, Harry's blind spot wasn't about incompetence or naivety. It was about trust, emotional immersion, and the very human desire to believe in the intentions of someone you love. He recalls observing moments where Harry's affection for Meghan was so complete that it shielded him from noticing small inconsistencies, subtle signals, and private communications that hinted at a broader plan. It's not that Harry was oblivious, it's that love can be a lens, focusing attention on devotion while filtering out nuance. Thomas recounts one particularly telling moment: a private exchange shortly after Meghan had arrived in the UK. They were discussing wedding plans, media appearances, and future engagements. Harry spoke with excitement, envisioning a life with Meghan fully integrated into the royal family. Meghan, on the other hand, responded with careful phrasing, gentle agreement, but also a strategic tone that subtly reinforced independence. To anyone else, the conversation appeared harmonious. To Thomas, it was a quiet exercise in control, with Meghan steering the dialogue in a direction that would ultimately serve her exit plan. It's the contradictions that stand out. Publicly, Meghan projected warmth and commitment. Privately, her words and actions suggested autonomy and foresight. Harry, immersed in emotion and expectation, often failed to notice these subtle cues. Thomas explains that this wasn't negligence, it was the natural result of trust and affection. Harry was fully engaged in the story he wanted to believe, a story of love, unity, and family. But the signals around him told a different tale, one he wouldn't fully comprehend until later. Thomas also highlights the role of timing. Meghan's interactions with Harry were often carefully calibrated to appear spontaneous, natural, and aligned with romantic ideals. Yet beneath the surface, they were deliberate. A pause here, a question there, a suggestion delivered at the precise moment, all contributed to a narrative that would guide Harry's expectations while leaving her options open. It's a level of subtlety that few could detect, and Thomas points out that it relied heavily on Harry's genuine trust. Without that trust, the plan might have been exposed much earlier. Emotional spikes emerge as Thomas recounts instances where he tried to hint at possible discrepancies. Subtle concerns, casual observations, or gentle questions about timing and behavior were often brushed aside or dismissed. Harry's responses were steeped in optimism and belief, creating a dynamic in which Meghan's control over the situation went largely unchallenged. It was a delicate balance. Love and trust allowed strategy to flourish, even in the midst of intense scrutiny and preparation for the wedding. Consider for a moment the pressure of the public eye. Harry, as a royal, had navigated media attention and family expectations his entire life. He understood diplomacy, appearances, and public narrative. Yet, despite this experience, he was vulnerable in ways he hadn't anticipated. Emotional attachment, combined with the novelty of romantic love, created blind spots that Meghan could leverage. Thomas emphasizes that this is not a critique of Harry's character. It's a recognition of human complexity, and how even the most intelligent and aware individuals can be guided by trust and affection. Thomas remembers an example during the engagement period. Meghan suggested certain public appearances, speaking engagements, and interviews. Harry was fully supportive, believing these actions demonstrated mutual commitment and partnership. In reality, Thomas would later conclude, these moves were part of a broader strategy to build autonomy, establish networks, and control perception. Each choice subtly aligned with the eventual exit plan, even as Harry interpreted them through the lens of love and partnership. The emotional contrast for Thomas was profound. Watching Harry operate with genuine devotion, unaware of the underlying strategy, created a mix of empathy and frustration. He recognized Harry's vulnerability and the depth of his love, but he also felt a sense of inevitability. Meghan's plan was unfolding as designed, and Harry's blind spot was a critical factor in its execution. The father-daughter relationship and the romantic partnership intersected in ways that would have significant consequences for all involved. Thomas also notes moments of subtle contradiction in public appearances. Harry would often respond to media questions with earnest emotion, projecting openness and loyalty. Meghan, however, mastered the balance of emotional authenticity and strategic control. Her communications, gestures, and interactions were carefully measured, allowing her to appear fully invested while maintaining the flexibility to execute her long-term plan. Harry, absorbed in genuine affection and the ceremonial responsibilities of his role, did not always notice these cues. This dynamic became particularly evident in the months leading up to the wedding. Thomas recalls observing interactions during family gatherings, media events, and private meetings. Each instance revealed patterns of influence, Meghan guiding conversations, shaping narratives, and strategically timing disclosures. Harry, focused on love, duty, and ceremony, remained largely unaware of the subtle orchestration. Thomas compares it to a stage performance. Harry was an engaged participant, fully present in the drama, while Meghan quietly directed the script behind the scenes. Thomas also considers the broader implications. Harry's blind spot was not merely a personal oversight. It had ripple effects across family dynamics, public perception, and media coverage. By underestimating the extent of Meghan's strategic communication, he inadvertently allowed her plan to progress unimpeded. Every public endorsement, every act of support, and every demonstration of trust reinforced the carefully managed narrative that would eventually justify and enable her exit. The contradictions continue to fascinate Thomas. How could love and strategy coexist so seamlessly? How could Meghan's actions simultaneously affirm commitment and advance independence? Thomas explains that this duality required mastery of emotional intelligence, foresight, and social perception. It was not manipulation in the crude sense, but the exercise of skill in navigating multiple realities, personal, familial, and public, simultaneously. There were moments that almost broke Thomas emotionally. Observing Harry's blind devotion, seeing him celebrate, reassure, and trust unreservedly, he felt a combination of admiration for Harry's character and sorrow for the eventual impact. The wedding, the engagements, the public declarations of love, all were genuine. But beneath the surface, Meghan's strategic positioning continued to unfold, with Harry's affection ensuring that her plans could proceed without interference. Thomas also recalls instances of private communication where Harry's blind spot became even more apparent. He would overhear or witness conversations in which Harry made assumptions about intention, openness, and alignment, while Meghan subtly guided outcomes without revealing full context. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience, subtlety, and a profound understanding of human behavior. For Thomas, witnessing this dance was simultaneously enlightening and heartbreaking. Audience, consider this. How often do we miss the subtle cues around us? How often do love, trust, and expectation create blind spots that allow unseen strategies to progress? For Thomas, these questions were not hypothetical. They were lived experience. Every gesture, word, and interaction between Harry and Meghan offered insight into a carefully orchestrated plan that would eventually unfold publicly in ways that few could anticipate. And yet, despite the complexity and subtlety, there were moments of genuine connection between Harry and Meghan. Laughter, shared stories, tender gestures, all authentic, all real. But Thomas emphasizes the tension inherent in these moments. Authentic affection existed alongside strategic intent. Love and strategy coexisted, intertwined, and created a dynamic that was as complex emotionally as it was intricate strategically. Thomas began to realize that Harry's blind spot was not a flaw. It was a factor that Meghan had likely accounted for. His trust, his devotion, and his focus on love made him an unwitting partner in a larger plan. And it is this realization that sets the stage for the next phase of revelations. The inner circle of allies, confidants, and advisors who were quietly supporting and executing elements of the strategy, allowing the plan to unfold with precision. By the end of this period, Thomas understood a fundamental truth. Harry's blind spot was critical to Meghan's ability to navigate both the public and private realms. Without his trust, the plan might have faltered. With it, she had the freedom to operate with remarkable discretion, building the foundations of her eventual departure. And Thomas knew that the next steps, revealing the inner workings of her support network and strategic communications, would expose the full scope of planning that had remained hidden until now. But the revelations about Meghan's allies, her private meetings, and the subtle orchestration behind the scenes would shock Thomas even more. They would reveal a web of strategy so intricate, so precise, that it challenged everything he thought he knew about influence, loyalty, and the execution of a plan hidden in plain sight. What really happens when the cameras stop rolling, when the crowds disperse, and the fairy tale spectacle of a royal wedding fades into private hallways? That was the question Thomas Markle couldn't shake as he tried to reconcile the public narrative with what he had observed and suspected. The royal family, as the world knows, is an institution steeped in centuries of tradition, protocol, and hierarchy. But behind those gilded walls, there exists a rhythm, a hidden world of rules and routines, pressures and subtle politics, a world few outsiders truly understand. And it was in that world that Thomas began to see the threads of Meghan's strategy come into focus. From his vantage point, he could see how the pressures of royal life might have shaped and perhaps even accelerated Meghan's plan. Every decision, every interaction, every public appearance carries weight beyond the individual. The royal family is a web of expectations, family legacy, media scrutiny, public duty, and protocol. To outsiders, it can look like pomp, privilege, and perfection. To insiders, it's a high-stakes chessboard where a single misstep can ripple outward in ways that are impossible to contain. Thomas knew that navigating this environment required extraordinary skill, and he began to realize that Meghan had already started mastering it, even as she projected ease and charm. He recalls private conversations and moments that were never meant for public eyes. Staff, aides, and courtiers operate in a strict hierarchy, and every word carries meaning. In casual moments, Thomas noticed subtle patterns, instructions that were worded carefully, offhand comments about scheduling that masked strategic maneuvering, and a constant undercurrent of negotiation that most observers never saw. Meghan, Thomas suspected, was attuned to this environment in a way that allowed her to operate effectively while maintaining appearances. She understood the unspoken rules, the hidden levers of influence, and how to navigate the power dynamics quietly without drawing attention to herself. The private corridors of royal life, Thomas realized, were also arenas for observation. He remembered anecdotes about staff noticing how Meghan handled seemingly trivial situations, correcting minor protocol missteps, managing interactions with senior royals, or steering conversations in subtle but meaningful directions. Each of these small actions, invisible to the general public, provided her with insight into the family's dynamics and the levers she could influence. It was a quiet accumulation of power, one that Thomas recognized only in retrospect, but one that formed the backbone of her eventual exit strategy. Consider the emotional intensity of this environment. Royal life, while glamorous in photos and television broadcasts, is rife with pressure, expectations, and judgment. Every choice is scrutinized, every appearance evaluated. Thomas emphasizes that for someone like Meghan, this pressure was both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge, to maintain composure, grace, and approval under relentless scrutiny. The opportunity to learn, observe, and subtly manipulate circumstances to align with a larger goal. Thomas suggests that she did both with remarkable skill. One striking contradiction Thomas observed was how Meghan could balance charm and calculations simultaneously. Publicly, she appeared warm, affectionate, and adaptable. Privately, she was observant, analytical, and sometimes deliberately reserved. These dual behaviors were subtle, almost imperceptible, but to someone paying close attention, they signaled a mind capable of planning multiple steps ahead. Thomas recognized that this duality was crucial. It allowed Meghan to maintain loyalty and affection in relationships while advancing her strategic objectives behind the scenes. The royal bubble, as Thomas calls it, also reveals how isolation can amplify influence. In the private world of royal routines, information is tightly controlled, interactions are structured, and access is limited. Meghan, according to Thomas, leveraged these dynamics expertly. She was selective about whom she confided in, carefully managed her communications, and built alliances with individuals who could support her objectives without drawing attention. It was a careful orchestration, executed in plain sight, yet invisible to those untrained in observing subtle power plays. Thomas also highlights emotional contradictions within this environment. Love and loyalty coexisted with observation and strategy. Every interaction was a negotiation. Every smile carried multiple layers of intent. Harry, he notes, remained largely unaware of the full scope, entrusting his judgment to affection, trust, and shared emotion. Meghan, meanwhile, balanced her genuine attachment with strategic foresight, creating a dynamic that was emotionally compelling, complex, and difficult for outsiders and even insiders to fully comprehend. He recounts specific moments where he could see this interplay: private discussions about events, decisions about public appearances, and subtle gestures of influence all contributed to a sense that Meghan was quietly managing her trajectory. The royal bubble is not forgiving. Minor missteps can become public scandals. But Meghan, Thomas realized, seemed to navigate the environment with foresight, learning the invisible rules, testing reactions, and gradually positioning herself for long-term autonomy. The secrecy of these corridors also played into her strategy. In public, Meghan and Harry presented a united front, charming the world with displays of love, commitment, and tradition. Behind closed doors, Thomas suggests Meghan was accumulating knowledge, building influence, and making calculated moves that few could detect. Every meeting, every private conversation, every careful choice contributed to a larger blueprint, one that would ultimately enable her to step away from the very family she appeared to be embracing. Thomas's emotional experience watching this unfold was complex. He felt pride in observing her intelligence and adaptability, awe at her ability to read subtle cues and manipulate outcomes, and sorrow at the implications for the relationships around her. The very qualities that made her remarkable in his eyes also created distance, uncertainty, and eventual estrangement. He saw firsthand how ambition, strategy, and emotional intelligence could coexist in ways that are both inspiring and troubling. Audience, consider this. How many decisions are made in the private moments, the behind-the-scenes interactions, and the unrecorded conversations that shape public outcomes? How much of what we see in the spotlight is carefully constructed, rehearsed, and guided by invisible hands? For Thomas, observing Meghan's navigation of the royal bubble was an education in influence, control, and the subtle power of private action. He also emphasizes the role of observation. Meghan, according to Thomas, was constantly gathering information: how staff responded, how family members interacted, and how media narratives unfolded. Every piece of information contributed to an evolving strategy. The royal bubble was both a pressure cooker and a laboratory, providing data, feedback, and insight that she could integrate into her planning. This meticulous collection of intelligence, combined with her communication strategy, created a foundation that would eventually support her exit. Contradictions emerge again. The royal bubble, outwardly majestic and structured, contained undercurrents of negotiation, observation, and subtle influence. Meghan's ability to operate in this dual reality, being both participant and strategist, allowed her to advance her objectives without triggering suspicion. Harry's focus on duty and affection further reinforced this dynamic, creating conditions that allowed her plan to flourish in a controlled yet unseen manner. Thomas recalls that, at times, the private pressures of the royal bubble intensified the stakes. Minor disagreements, protocol missteps, and media misinterpretations could all have serious consequences. Meghan's ability to anticipate reactions, adjust behavior, and maintain composure under these conditions demonstrates a strategic intelligence that Thomas views as remarkable, even unprecedented. It's one thing to navigate public life, it's another to master the invisible rules that govern an institution steeped in centuries of tradition. And yet, despite the strategy, there were moments of humanity, private laughter, shared stories, and fleeting gestures of warmth punctuated the otherwise meticulous orchestration. These moments remind Thomas, and the audience, that Meghan's plan was not devoid of emotion. She could love, care, and connect authentically while simultaneously managing a complex strategy. It is this duality that makes the story compelling, revealing, and deeply human. By the end of his observation, Thomas realized that the royal bubble was both a stage and a testing ground. Meghan had learned its rules, navigated its pressures, and subtly influenced its outcomes. Every private moment, every behind-the-scenes interaction, and every careful decision contributed to a trajectory that would ultimately enable her independence. It was a lesson in strategy, foresight, and the quiet power of observation. But Thomas knew there was more to uncover: hidden allies, private confidants, and subtle signals between key individuals. All hinted at a network supporting the plan, a network that few outside the inner circle could recognize. The royal bubble, as beautiful and intimidating as it was only one part of the complex ecosystem that allowed Meghan's strategy to develop and unfold. And the deeper Thomas looked, the more he realized the true complexity of the plan and the people who enabled it were yet to be revealed. These revelations, when fully uncovered, would challenge everything we thought we knew about loyalty, influence, and the private machinations of one of the world's most scrutinized families. But what Thomas would discover next, the secret allies and subtle collaborations behind the scenes, would shock him even further, revealing layers of planning that went far beyond the royal bubble itself. Who really stands beside you, and who is quietly steering the path you think is your own? For Thomas Markle, this question became impossible to ignore as he pieced together the network of individuals surrounding Meghan Markle. Behind her radiant public persona and calculated private communications, there existed a constellation of friends, aides, advisors, and confidants, each playing a role in the subtle orchestration of her life, her image, and ultimately her exit strategy. Thomas remembers first noticing patterns in the people Meghan chose to confide in. They weren't always the closest family members or obvious friends. Instead, they were individuals who understood the stakes of royal life, who could manage both discretion and ambition, and who could operate effectively within networks of influence. These were the allies who knew how to relay messages, test ideas, and in many cases, shield aspects of her plan from unintended eyes. To Thomas, it became clear that Meghan's social circle wasn't accidental. It was carefully curated, capable of supporting strategy while maintaining loyalty. One of the most surprising aspects for Thomas was how seamlessly Meghan balanced authenticity with discretion. Her friends were not merely companions, they were intermediaries, sounding boards, and sometimes silent collaborators in the execution of her plans. Even casual conversations, when viewed retrospectively, contained layers of intent. A seemingly offhand remark to a friend about media coverage could be a test of potential public reaction. A casual lunch with an aide might be a rehearsal for how a future narrative would be presented to the world. Each interaction carried the dual weight of personal connection and strategic foresight. Thomas recalls moments when he realized the depth of this network. A friend who seemed trivial at first appeared repeatedly in key communications, subtly shaping outcomes or guiding choices without drawing attention. An assistant, initially thought to be handling mundane logistical tasks, was quietly managing public messaging and timing. Even seemingly innocuous social gatherings were leveraged to convey influence or test perceptions. For Thomas, these layers of coordination were both astonishing and unsettling. The sophistication was remarkable, but it also highlighted just how calculated many interactions were. Audience, consider the implications. How often do our closest relationships carry hidden layers of influence? How many decisions, even those appearing spontaneous, are subtly guided by allies we barely notice? For Meghan, this network was critical. It allowed her to operate within the royal bubble, manage communications with discretion, and prepare for the eventual steps that would redefine her relationship with the monarchy. Thomas emphasizes that these allies were not mere accessories, they were essential to the strategy's execution. Thomas also observed subtle signals, coded communications, and behavioral cues exchanged among these allies. A look across a room, a carefully worded email, or the timing of a social media post could carry significance beyond the obvious. To an outsider, these were mundane interactions. To Thomas, trained now to see the patterns, they were deliberate signals, acknowledgments of strategy, confirmations of plans, or testing of potential outcomes. It was like observing a private code, one that could influence events at the highest levels while remaining invisible to the public eye. One incident particularly stands out. Thomas noticed a sequence of private messages between Meghan and a close friend, discussing not just social events, but potential media responses and public perception. At the time, he didn't fully grasp the meaning. Later, he recognized it as a rehearsal of influence, a preemptive shaping of opinion that would minimize risk and maximize leverage. The realization hit him hard. Her friends were in many ways extensions of her strategy, capable of amplifying her intentions while preserving discretion. Contradictions abounded. These relationships appeared to be rooted in genuine affection, camaraderie, and trust, yet they also served tactical purposes. Thomas struggled to reconcile the dual nature of these alliances. On one hand, they reflected genuine connection and support. On the other, they were part of a network that subtly advanced a plan Thomas had only begun to understand. The tension between love and strategy, friendship and orchestration, created an emotional complexity that haunted him. The strategic use of allies also extended to the media. Thomas notes that Meghan's circle included individuals who understood narrative control, timing, and perception. Messages filtered through these intermediaries could be used to test responses, gauge public sentiment, or subtly frame future events. Even small, seemingly trivial social interactions became opportunities to gather information, test boundaries, or refine messaging. Thomas likens it to a game of chess where each pawn, knight, and bishop represents a person acting in alignment with an overarching strategy, often without full visibility of the complete board. And yet, amidst all this orchestration, Thomas observed authentic relationships. Meghan laughed, confided, and sought advice from those in her circle. But even in these moments, he recognized layers, questions that probed reactions, stories shared that subtly framed perception, and suggestions that gently nudged outcomes. The human warmth was real, yet it existed alongside strategic intent, creating a duality that Thomas found both fascinating and disconcerting. Thomas also highlights the role of misdirection. Some allies were deliberately positioned to divert attention from key aspects of the plan. Others served as trusted intermediaries, passing messages with precision while keeping their own knowledge compartmentalized. This network ensured that even as Meghan appeared fully immersed in life within the royal bubble, she retained autonomy, control, and influence over her trajectory. It was an intricate system designed to operate seamlessly while leaving few traces visible to those outside the inner circle. Audience, ask yourself this: how much of what we see in public is shaped not just by the individual, but by a network of confidants and allies who operate quietly behind the... Perhaps the most striking element was Meghan's awareness of optics. Messages weren't just about content, they were about perception. She understood how words, even in private communication, could be discovered, leaked, or interpreted. The precision with which she managed this demonstrated foresight. She wasn't just communicating, she was controlling how her communications might ripple through the public and private spheres. It was a level of calculation that Thomas realized few could match. The emotional weight of recognizing these patterns was immense. For Thomas, understanding that his daughter had been planning a trajectory long before the world became aware was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. He admired her intelligence and skill, yet he also felt the sting of distance, the subtle alienation that came from realizing that some actions were not shared fully, not for secrecy's sake alone, but as part of a larger plan that would eventually separate them in profound ways. Even casual communications contained indicators of future strategy. A brief reference to a charity event could suggest public positioning. A question about media appearances could hint at timing for announcements. Each fragment, when viewed collectively, formed a roadmap, a hidden blueprint of intent. And for Thomas, piecing together that blueprint was both revelation and torment. He could see the trajectory, understand the intent, and yet remain powerless to influence it. By the end of this period of observation, Thomas had amassed an understanding of Meghan's strategic communications that was unprecedented in his life. He could trace patterns, anticipate actions, and identify the signs of planning and foresight that marked her every move. And this understanding set the stage for the revelations that would follow. Secret allies, media maneuvers, and financial strategies that converged to execute a meticulously planned exit from the royal family. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Hidden messages, conversations with confidants, and subtle signals in public interactions all pointed to one undeniable conclusion: Meghan's exit was not spontaneous. It was deliberate, carefully timed, and guided by a comprehensive understanding of influence, perception, and opportunity. And Thomas, despite his closeness to her, was only beginning to uncover the depth of the plan. The question that lingered, the question that would drive the next phase of revelations, was this: if these secret communications revealed the blueprint, who else was aware? How many individuals had been enlisted, knowingly or unknowingly, to facilitate the strategy? And what would happen when the world finally saw the plan unfold? But what Thomas would uncover next, the hidden allies, the secret advisors, and the people working behind the scenes, would shock him even more than the messages themselves. And it would reveal the complexity of a plan that stretched far beyond anything he had imagined. Could someone be so close and yet so unaware? That's the question Thomas Markle wrestled with when he considered Prince Harry's role in Meghan's carefully plotted plan. Watching Harry during the wedding and in the months leading up to it, Thomas began to realize that Harry, charming, earnest, and deeply in love, might have been the last person to notice what was quietly unfolding before him. While the world saw a fairy tale romance, Thomas saw a subtle blind spot, one that Meghan had skillfully navigated, allowing her to advance her strategy without confrontation or suspicion. From Thomas's perspective, Harry's blind spot wasn't about incompetence or naivety. It was about trust, emotional immersion, and the very human desire to believe in the intentions of someone you love. He recalls observing moments where Harry's affection for Meghan was so complete that it shielded him from noticing small inconsistencies, subtle signals, and private communications that hinted at a broader plan. It's not that Harry was oblivious, it's that love can be a lens, focusing attention on devotion while filtering out nuance. Thomas recounts one particularly telling moment, a private exchange shortly after Meghan had arrived in the UK. They were discussing wedding plans, media appearances, and future engagements. Harry spoke with excitement, envisioning a life with Meghan fully integrated into the royal family. Meghan, on the other hand, responded with careful phrasing, gentle agreement, but also a strategic tone that subtly reinforced independence. To anyone else, the conversation appeared harmonious. To Thomas, it was a quiet exercise in control, with Meghan steering the dialogue in a direction that would ultimately serve her exit plan. It's the contradiction